This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Warning. This episode contains descriptions of mental illness and suicidal ideation, which may be distressing to some listeners. I'm Georgia, and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that swaps out the depressing news headlines for stories of hope that won't make the front page. Each episode, we meet someone who's had a bit of a hard road, but has found hope and healing along the way. And hopefully they inspire you to look for the good in your own life as well. Episode 9, Mitch Farrell. When Mitch Farrell was in high school, he wanted to die. That is not an exaggeration. Just before his school certificate exams in Year 10, he experienced his first panic attack. Shortly after, he was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. Not long after that, post-traumatic stress disorder as well. Mitch did not see himself living past 25 years old. Now, Mitch is nearing 29, and he is using his lived experience with mental illness to help others every day. He's a peer worker with the Western Sydney Local Health District, and he spends his days emotionally supporting those experiencing mental illness. It was an absolute honour to hear Mitch's story, and I'm so excited for you to meet him as well.
My name's Mitch. I'm 28 years old. I was born in South Korea and I was adopted by an Australian couple, and I've lived in Australia ever since. I've grown up in the Hills District. I think I've grown up in what I would have considered very regular situations, and then sort of experienced a bit of a mental health journey, which I'm going to speak about as we move on through this conversation.
So how did that journey with mental illness begin? When did that kind of start for you?
Yeah, so my journey started when I was 15 and I was diagnosed with an anxiety and depression disorder. And then I was diagnosed with a post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from other life experiences that I'd had involving some family issues. And this really sort of stemmed from, feeling this pressure at school, not even to necessarily succeed so much as not to screw up. On the day of the school certificate exams, which he took in Year 10, I ended up with a panic attack, an anxiety attack, and hyperventilating and going through, that horrible experience. It wasn't until that I started expressing my panic and my angst and nervousness that the reasons behind the panic attack, that they sort of were able to work out, okay, something's clearly not right here. It's not a physical thing. There's something wrong here.
High school is hard enough without throwing mental illness into the mix, and a very visible one at that. Speaking from personal experience, panic attacks in high school are scary and embarrassing. I wouldn't wish them upon anyone.
It definitely wasn't an easy thing. In saying that, though, I do want to stress that I also did have support and that I was able to, still smile and have a laugh. But in saying that, though, the entire time was just a horrible time for me, really. I was depressed. I felt unmotivated and just lethargic. I didn't know how to vent my anger, and I did get angry and frustrated quite easily. Extraordinarily self-conscious about, where I stood in the world and, stood at school with my friends. I felt as if I was a victim of the world, really. I felt victimized. Ultimately, there was this sense of hopelessness in both ways, really, in sense of not being of any worth and being hopeless in that sense, and also being hopeless in the sense of not having any hope for the future. It was just constant pain. Constant emotional pain, and this sense of it never ending, and there was no way out. And if I had the choice of, living to the age of 77, enduring this pain, or ending things early and, not having to suffer anymore, that was the option I was going to take. I didn't see any hope. I couldn't see what life would look like in the future. I didn't see having a life, let alone having a happy life, having relationships, having a career, traveling. None of these things felt possible at all. You partner everything that I've just said, and I just wanted out. I just wanted to check out early. That's it. I honestly didn't see myself getting past 25, and I made that openly clear with my mum and my family and with my support team. I just didn't see a way past the age of 25. But, I'm 28 now, almost 29. So as far as I'm concerned, I've got like three and a half years in the black. So, I must have done something right in the end.
Mitch did do something right. He may have wanted desperately to escape the hell he was living in, but he didn't. He stayed. It was hard and he suffered, but he did get through those final years of high school. Mitch was unable to complete his HSC exams, but still managed to get himself a place at university, an accomplishment which he is still very proud of. At uni, Mitch studied social sciences, a course which he says helped drag him out of the hard place he found himself in. And one day, everything started to turn around.
So there was a really big moment in my life. I think it's important to note there was a catalyst for change in that one moment. But before I get to that, there were just the amount of support that I had from my family, from my mum in particular, from two really good friends that I had at school who didn't necessarily get it, but they were always there to support me. And their constant support just made things bearable for me to cope with. And it just took the edge off, and it kept me safe, essentially. And eventually, I think it came to a point where I wasn't in school anymore. I wasn't surrounded by this pressured environment. And I was really able to start to try and find myself, because all of a sudden you're out of high school and the world changes. In hindsight, school is just such a, small part of our time. But in the early years, that's all that we know. So once I got out of high school and the world opened up, things didn't feel as doom and gloom. University was a completely different experience, educational experience.
So Mitch had gotten out of the environment that had made him so anxious. Now it was time to heal.
The key moment for me that I think it all turned around, I got closure around the trauma that caused the post-traumatic stress disorder, in the sense that I, confronted the person and confronted the situation, addressed it, and really emphatically said no more. I'm not going to let this experience define me. I'm not going to let you, make us live in fear. And from that moment on, it just felt as if I had this weight and darkness completely lifted off my chest. And everything just seemed to click, because it was one of those things. I've dealt with this. I don't need to feel that pressure anymore. I'm capable. I've shown that I'm capable of living a life. I can overcome these things. So it really instilled this sense of self-belief, which apparently had been there the entire time. And it's the reason why my teachers and family had supported me all that time.
Mitch did possibly the bravest thing that anyone could do. Now he's using his own lived experience to help others heal.
What really helped me with my recovery in the early stages was, I remember I was in year 12 and we were studying mental illnesses and PDHPE. And my teachers asked if I felt comfortable talking from a lived experience point of view on what it is, what the illness is, what it feels like, how it makes you feel. It was quite daunting at first, and obviously I wasn't forced to do it, but I took the opportunity up and I spoke about it. And the reaction that I got was not what I expected. It was one of concern and compassion, as opposed to what I was fearful of, which was of judgment. And I was quite surprised about that. But I found speaking quite to be an empowering, feeling and an empowering moment. And I realized at that point, I think that this is something that I really, really want to be able to do. Surely there's got to be a way of me being able to use my experiences, in a sense, to help others. And then, I went through high school, got into university doing social sciences, but my passion with mental illness always stood there. And eventually, after doing some charity work, some volunteer charity work, the director of the charity asked me to speak at something called the Young Healthy Mind Forum, which is a forum for high school students to speak about mental illness and to try and help break down that barrier. And I spoke as a lived experience guest speaker there. And it all just started to feed in with each other, with everything. And then, this position came up, I applied for it, and bam.
Bam indeed. Mitch is now a peer worker with the Towards Zero Suicides team at Western Sydney Local Health District. In a world where mental illness is still stigmatised, Mitch's experience not only allows him to help people, but he gets to make a career out of it.
I think I just got to a point where I recognized all the support that I'd been given, and I really just wanted to pay that forward, knowing that there were plenty of people that, don't have that immediate support available. And my good experiences really forced me to look on the other side of the coin. So, I could keep rambling on, but that's where I ended up. I'm in a position now where trying to kill myself was a prerequisite for the job.
The way Mitch says that in an almost upbeat manner is jarring. For a second, I was lost for words. When I was interviewing him, I felt this small tug of emotion when he said that. I was imagining Mitch as a scared, broken 16-year-old, wanting to give up on everything. And now staring down the camera at me was a 28-year-old, not only helping others, but using the worst experience of his life to do it. And I wanted to know more. What exactly does being a peer worker involve to someone who doesn't really know?
So a peer worker is a non-clinical member using their lived experience to connect with someone that is experiencing something similar to what they've been through. And they've recovered enough to get to that point to really empathize with that person and establish a connection with them and say, hey, what you're going through is unimaginable. I haven't been exactly what you've been through, but I can tell you that the same emotions are there. I don't know what's happened to you, and you don't need to share to me what's happened with you, but I can see that you're in pain, and I want you to know that I've experienced pain similar to that. And really just try and bond with that person and that connection to really try and help steer that person into a better mindset, and really just address the emotional concerns and emotional health of someone that's really, really struggling, and take it from a position, not of a position of power in the traditional medical setting where the doctor or clinician or medical staff had the power over the patient, so much as let's, work together as a team to try and get you to the best place possible. And so as a peer worker, it's really listening to the person, advocating for the person, and just supporting them as someone walking by their side.
And very soon, Western Sydney will have a whole lot more access to peer workers with the launch of Safe Haven. We just hope to save lives and be a real-time support to those experiencing mental health crisis.
I think for people, it's difficult to understand, when you're in such a difficult place in your mind, everything's frantic, everything's 100 miles an hour. You go to the emergency department and it's not the right place for someone in that mindset. Lots of noises, bright lights, there's a lot of graphic imagery with people coming in with injuries. It's just overall can be a very chaotic place to be in. And it's not necessarily the best place for someone that is experiencing suicide crisis or ideation. So the purpose of the Safe Haven is that it is meant to be a safe place where you can go, where it's an appropriate environment, it's a calming environment, and the person will be treated for what they need to be treated for. It's very easy for people to go to the emergency department and be lost in it because they're not showing anything physical. You don't see their arm popped out, or you don't see them. I don't really want to go into too much detail, but there aren't physical elements to it unless there's been an attempt. So I think it's very important because people can go and get the support they need within the appropriate time frame, as opposed to going to the emergency department and waiting up to 8 hours and then eventually just walking out because you're tired of waiting. So it's very important in moving forward so that these people don't fall through the cracks and we can get them the support that they need and they genuinely deserve.
And a service like Safe Haven could not be coming at a better time. In a city that has experienced months of continued lockdown, mental health is dropping.
It's very easy to get caught up in numbers, and I don't really want to try and quantify it too much, but I think the best example is that I've said before, there was a report out that Lifelines and the kids' helpline numbers were up by 33% from last year's lockdown. And I think that sums it up quite nicely. Actually, you can see that people are reaching out, people are struggling, people are going through bad places. I've personally heard some, very upsetting stories with people because they just don't see it out. Their businesses are suffering because they're family-owned businesses. And I can't imagine what they're going through. Apart from that, I can see that they're hurting and our society is hurting. And I encourage anyone that's listening that is suffering from any sort of mental distress and they're afraid of speaking up or they don't feel as if they've got the right to speak up, please do, because you deserve to get the help that you need. We're only human. We're all in this together, and it is a really, really troubling time. And for all those people that have called Lifeline, I know that there's also people that haven't called. So I guess this is a call to them as well. Please reach out. There are people there that care for you, and we want to help as much as we can.
How has COVID and lockdown affected your mental health, Mitch?
I definitely struggled. Definitely earlier in the year, I really struggled. That first week of lockdown was really, really challenging. And for a couple of reasons, I think a lot of people can empathize with this, but for me, my personal experience of it with my mental illness and mental health in general, the ways that I've been taught to cope with my mental health have just sort of been completely taken away by COVID. One of the main ones that I think everyone can relate to is social interaction and social connection. That's just sort of gone. And it's really helped me realize on how important human connection actually is. Another one of my strategies, which was exercise, and helps me give control over my own emotions, that's completely gone again. I did that through playing football. I've been playing football for 24 years, and that's I can't do that anymore. And I don't know when I'm going to get it back or if we're going to get it back. Another big one that I've had is disruption to my routines. I'm working from home now, and while working from home, it felt great for the first bit. It felt like a bit of a novelty. I could sleep in a bit longer. I could go to work in my pajamas. The novelty of it has sort of worn off now. And it's really made me realize on how mentally beneficial my morning routine was, in the sense that I was thinking about things, and it was really just sort of like a mindfulness exercise. And, that's just sort of gone now. You don't really realize on how important these things are until you start working from home.
Well, it is good to know that Mitch is human like the rest of us. Bad hair days, bad mood days. There's no doubt that Mitch has recovered immensely from his illness, but I had a pressing question for him, one that I've asked myself time and time again in my own mental illness recovery. Do you think that it's possible to get to a point where you can say that people are free from mental illness, or do you think it's something that has to be managed?
I'm going to play a very political answer with this and say yes to both, because each person is different, and it depends on which perspective you come from. It's your reality. It's not for me to make that call for people. That's a conversation for them to have with their support. For example, people coming off their medication, what are those definitions? Are they free from mental illness, or are they just managing it in a different way? And it's just something that I'm not qualified to make that call on. But I will say I do think having a mental illness does make us more susceptible to experiencing it again. So it's just something that people should always keep an eye on. But I also think while we're on this topic, it's something that everyone should try and do and manage their mental health, because everyone's susceptible to a mental illness. I think that this current time, is really sort of proving that point. Everyone's vulnerable to mental illness. And, while not everyone will get a diagnosis, everyone can still have poor mental health. So it's something that, I plead to people, keep an eye on. And if you do think that you're in trouble or you are feeling a bit down, reach out.
Why do you think mental illness is still so hard to talk about?
There's quite a few reasons, in particular within our health district as well, because we are a very multicultural health district. But I think in Western culture, it's still a very uncomfortable and unwanted conversation to have. There's still that stigma around it. And it's just one of those barriers that needs to be navigated very, very carefully, because people can take offense to it. Admitting to it leaves us vulnerable and can alter aspects of our relationships. It can challenge how we identify with our genders, in the sense that men are, a high priority group of risk of suicide. And that's because they've got that inbuilt mentality of, I'm a man, I've got to suck it up, I can't show any emotions. So I think there's all those aspects to it that really feed into creating barriers that are really difficult to navigate. But I will say I feel as if we have made ground in trying to clear and break down. And then if we speak in terms of the Western Sydney multiculturalism, you can throw a whole nother layer on top of that, in the sense that you have cultural differences, you have religious differences, you have language differences. I was speaking with a couple of my colleagues, and in their native tongue, there isn't a word for mental illness. The closest word to mental illness is the word crazy. Not in particularly a very productive word when trying to break down stigma of mental illness. it's a barrier that we've all got to be willing to talk about and not be afraid to show vulnerability and show that leadership through vulnerability, really. That's how we break this stigma. That's how we grow as, a more compassionate and empathetic society.
Mitch, how has your mental illness and your mental health journey changed who you are?
That's a good question. I'd probably say definitely at the beginning, it changed how I felt and acted. But I don't necessarily think it changed who I am as a person. To me, change implies becoming something different. And I don't know that I've become something different. I don't think change is, accurate. I think my journey has given me tools and knowledge to move through life. It's shown me who I am and helped me discover who I've always been deep down. It's shown me my potential that has always been there. Although I couldn't see it or even believe that it was there, my family and support network certainly did. And ultimately, I guess I don't want my journey to change anyone. I want it to inspire and establish hope for others to find who they really are and find a life full of meaning.
Thank you so much to Mitch Farrell for sharing his incredible story. You can read more about Mitch and the work of his team in the show notes. If this episode affected you in some way and you need someone to talk to, Lifeline is available on 13 11 14. If you or someone you know has a story of hope to share and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, I would love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hopepodcasts.com.au. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to get future episodes in your feed and tell a friend about it while you're at it. You can also leave a review on whatever platform you're listening from and tell us what you love about the podcast. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'll leave you with this verse. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.